It's so sad, of course, when we talk about the incredible woman that was Dr. Freni Ginwala. Now, of course, also well known as the first Speaker of Parliament in South Africa. But if you take a look at the history of how it all worked out, that would, of course, been around the time of Nelson Mandela, wouldn't it? Well, of course, we have to now get the thoughts, the views and the memories of the Nelson Mandela Foundation on the death of the late Dr. Ginwala as well. Not just a struggle stalwart, Sello Hatang, CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, but if you just Google the name Nelson Mandela or you Google the name Dr. Freni Ginwala, Sello, you're going to see them in so many photos together. The two were iconic for South Africa at the time, weren't they?
They indeed were, and I think we've lost one of those people that we will look back and say she was one of the greatest that this country has ever had. And I think it's important that at this moment we convey our deepest condolences to his family, to his friends, and to say to South Africa that here we have someone who was one of the greatest that has fallen. I think she was the picture, the image of what professionalism is. She was a representation of what it was to be firm, and when gentleness was needed, she could then be also be there. If you look at Parliament, how she ran Parliament, there was a sense of dignity about the place, that it represented something that was greater than all of us. And today we will miss her. We say we'll miss her forever, but that as she crosses over, she must convey to the likes of Madiba, Ahmed Kathrada, that we're trying our best to build a country of their dreams, even though we are still far from that dream.
You take a look. I mentioned the photos that I've been looking at when I knew you and I were going to be talking to each other. And there's a beautiful photo here. It was the then outgoing president, Nelson Mandela, the late president, of course, Graça Machel, kissing Freni Ginwala at Parliament as well, as he was beginning to leave Parliament and hand over the baton. It wasn't just a friendly relationship. It must have been so important because this was the person that Nelson Mandela and the ANC trusted as the first face of a people's parliament for the world to see. This wasn't just anybody. And I think it's difficult to explain the value that she must have added to Parliament on a global scale.
I think what you needed was someone that had a sense of, that had that gravitas to represent the parliament that was going to be a parliament that was going to be laying the foundation for the future we wanted to see. And she was a founding member of the board, a founding trustee of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And some of my colleagues who worked with her said that whenever you were in her presence, you got a sense that their relationship with Madiba was not just one that was one of professionals, but actually was also very friendly, of people who were very friendly with each other, but respected each other deeply. The sense of discipline in places. And I think if we are to do anything with the country we want to see in future, is to say, how do we make sure that even when we bring in people into places, that we don't bring friends who come into these places to destroy the dream, to defer the dream further. In other words, it shouldn't be about people that we're just bringing in because they are just our friends, but they should be delivering something, giving more than just their friendship to an institution such as Parliament, to an institution such as the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I think if you were to look at some of the photos that we have, we were helping her family last year rather, to help deal with her archives, because she really believed in archives, preservation of archives. One of the calls that I had with her was about preserving not only her archives, but ensuring that we push the legacy of the foundation and of the country, that we preserve its heritage. And if you look at those photographs that we were looking at today, in our building, you saw someone that was in awe of Nelson Mandela, but could differ with him. Was in awe of Nelson Mandela, but could tell him when he was getting something wrong. And I think if we are to have leaders like those, surround ourselves with such people, it means that our democracy will gain a different meaning, a deeper meaning, and will continue to build a caring democracy that tries to pull up the poor and the vulnerable.
Do you think she ever gave the impression of taking sides, Sello? I'm not asking you a political question. I wouldn't ask you a political question, but everyone I've spoken to, regardless of their political affiliation, has told me today that she always held the line down the middle, even if it was an ANC member. And that's why she was in the position for 10 years. It's why she was so highly considered and so highly respected. Even if it was her own party, she always pulled them back in line.
You know, observing her in Parliament, one always had this sense of admiration. I remember watching how she conducted those sessions, and one wondered, is she? Are we sure that she's still in that? Rather, I should say that we were assured that she was independent, that her conduct was of an independent person, not one who was clearly biased in their conduct and in how they were dealing with the opposition. And I think these are observations of an outsider, a South African who was just watching our first speaker do the job, difficult job of someone who had to be neutral all the time and make sure that the institution it always carried the aura that it needed to carry, so that it was a respected institution. And today you kind of look at our parliament and you wonder if the institution still carries that kind of dignity. And I'm not suggesting that it was a perfect parliament. I mean, you'd remember that we also had members of parliament who exchanged fisticuffs as well. And even with that, you'd have people being put together to be reconciled post that the differences that were there. And I think if we are to look at the Johnny DeLange moment, for example, it's one of those moments that we'll look back at and say, here was a parliament where you could have two parliamentarians exchange fists, but you still respected that institution, because you saw how after that moment, you saw how the two parliamentarians conducted themselves following that moment. And I think I wonder, of course, I'll always wonder, unless if someone was there, what was said by her to the two of them about the institution and the importance of preserving such an institution.